Something massive is unfolding quietly on the world stage, and most people are distracted by everyday noise, entertainment, and small headlines. But this shift is not small. It has the potential to redraw how power operates globally, who gets to make decisions, who controls peace, and who becomes vulnerable in the process. When big powers start redesigning the rules of engagement, the ripple effects don't stay in Washington, Moscow, or Europe. They travel straight into fragile countries, struggling economies, conflict zones, and politically unstable regions, and Nigeria is firmly in that category. Donald Trump is pushing a bold new direction that looks like a direct challenge to the old global order. Step by step, the foundations of traditional international cooperation are being questioned, weakened, and in some cases abandoned. First came the move away from long-standing international bodies that once shaped diplomacy, conflict management, and economic cooperation. That alone sent a message: the old systems no longer serve the interest of those who built them. Then came something even more disruptive, the announcement of a new structure being framed as a peace board, designed to handle international conflicts, negotiations, and influence outside the traditional frameworks that the world has relied on for decades. On the surface, it sounds like a solution. Peace is a beautiful word. Stability sounds comforting. Order feels necessary in a chaotic world. But behind every beautiful word in politics, there is always a deeper calculation. The most controversial part is the idea that permanent membership on this peace board comes with a massive financial price tag. In other words, influence is no longer just about diplomacy, history, or alliances, it is about who can afford a seat at the table. That alone changes the nature of global power. It creates a system where wealthy nations consolidate influence, while weaker nations are pushed further to the margins. The world quietly shifts from collective decision-making into controlled access power. Think about what that means long-term. Future generations may grow up in a world where the old global institutions are barely relevant. The names may still exist on paper, but real decisions could happen somewhere else, among a smaller group of powerful players who control access, funding, and influence. That is how power quietly migrates without noise, without protest, without dramatic collapse, just gradual replacement. But this is not just an abstract global conversation. It connects directly to Nigeria. As this peace board idea was being unveiled, Trump made comments that placed Nigeria firmly in the international spotlight, especially around terrorism and religious violence. That framing matters. Language shapes perception. Perception shapes policy. Once a country is repeatedly described through a security lens on global platforms, it becomes easier for foreign powers to justify intervention, pressure, conditional partnerships, or strategic involvement. This is why Nigerians cannot afford to sleep on this conversation. Because when powerful nations start talking about your internal problems openly, it usually means discussions are already happening behind closed doors. Maps are being studied. Risk assessments are being written. Strategic interests are being calculated. Nigeria is no longer just a domestic issue, it becomes a global fire. And here is the painful reality: Nigeria's internal crisis makes it extremely vulnerable to external influence. Insecurity has reached levels that were once unthinkable. Communities are being emptied. Villages are under constant threat. Farmers cannot farm. Traders cannot move freely. Children are growing up surrounded by fear instead of opportunity. Millions of citizens are displaced, living in camps where survival becomes the daily achievement instead of progress. Kidnapping has turned into an industry. Violence has become normalized. Entire regions are psychologically exhausted. And yet, leadership responses often feel slow, fragmented, politicized, or disconnected from the suffering on the ground. That is the opening foreign powers notice. Because unstable nations become negotiation zones. They become bargaining chips. They become experimental grounds for foreign security partnerships, influence expansion, and geopolitical games. Not necessarily because outsiders are evil, but because power always moves toward opportunity. Now ask yourself something honestly: if Nigeria were stable, united, economically strong, and secure, would anyone be discussing its internal security on global platforms in this way? Would foreign leaders be shaping narratives about Nigerian conflicts? Would international bodies be quietly studying displacement numbers and territorial control? Of course not. The vulnerability creates attention. The weakness attracts interest. And this is where the peace board conversation becomes more than just a foreign policy idea. It becomes a signal. A signal that global powers may start redesigning how conflicts in fragile countries are managed, who intervenes, who negotiates, who profits, who influences outcomes. Some people might celebrate this as help. Others may fear it as control. But either way, Nigeria cannot pretend it does not matter. Because once you lose the ability to fully control your internal security narrative, others will tell your story for you. And when that happens, your priorities may no longer be the priority. Now let's talk about the humanitarian side that keeps being ignored in high-level discussions: displaced citizens. Millions of Nigerians are living in camps, unable to return home due to insecurity. These are not tourists. These are farmers, teachers, traders, children, elderly people, families who once lived productive lives. They did not choose this reality. Violence forced it on them. Living in a displacement camp is not living. It is survival mode. Limited healthcare. Limited food. Limited dignity. Limited opportunity. Psychological trauma. Generational instability. Children growing up without stability are tomorrow's broken society. A nation cannot claim progress while millions of its citizens are trapped in limbo. And the painful question remains, if the political will existed to solve this crisis decisively, would it still drag on this long? Capacity is not the issue. Resources are not the issue. Coordination and political courage are the issue. When citizens remain displaced for years, the world begins to interpret that as structural failure. And structural failure invites foreign involvement, sometimes as partners, sometimes as supervisors, sometimes as silent controllers. This is the geopolitical reality many people don't like to discuss. Now zoom out again. A new global power structure is being proposed. Old alliances are being questioned. New platforms are being introduced. Security narratives are being reshaped. Fragile countries are being discussed more openly. Power is reorganizing itself quietly. History has shown us repeatedly that global power shifts rarely announce themselves loudly. They happen gradually, through policy changes, new institutions, strategic language, economic leverage, and narrative control. By the time people realize what has changed, the system is already locked in. This is why attention matters. Not panic. Not conspiracy. Attention. Understanding patterns. Watching decisions. Listening to how countries are framed in global conversations. Recognizing when your nation's story starts being written by outsiders instead of by its own leadership. The real danger is not change itself. The danger is being unprepared for change. Nigeria must decide whether it wants to remain reactive or become proactive. Whether it wants to fix its internal security genuinely or continue managing crises until external forces begin shaping solutions for us. Because if internal instability continues, global powers will not wait forever. They will act in their own interest, as they always have throughout history. The question is whether Nigerians will still have meaningful influence over what happens next. So this is not just about Trump. It's not just about a peace board. It's not just about international politics. It's about sovereignty, stability, responsibility, leadership, and the cost of ignoring warning signs. The world is shifting. Power structures are moving. Narratives are forming. Nigeria is already inside the conversation whether we like it or not. The only question left is whether Nigerians will wake up early enough to shape their own future, or whether others will shape it for us. Think deeply about it. What do you truly believe this new global direction represents? opportunity for peace, or a new layer of influence? And when Nigeria keeps appearing in international security discussions, should we feel protected or concerned? Your thoughts matter. Keep the conversation alive.